Hi, welcome back to Central Line. I'm your host, Katie Berlin, and we have a very special guest with us today. Those of you who are going to be joining us at AAHA Con will actually see her up on the main stage for our keynote. But if you're not going to be there, we'll miss you. But at least you don't have to miss our guest, Dr. Rebecca Heiss. Welcome to Central Line.
Thanks so much for having me. Oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me on, Katie. I'm really excited about it.
This is super fun because you have a unique perspective on our profession in that you are married to a veterinarian, but are not a veterinarian yourself. And so you probably see and hear quite a lot of what we're used to talking about, but you aren't, that's not your daily life in and out. So I'm really curious to know what that's like.
Yeah. It's interesting, and it's so funny too, because I don't think I told you this earlier when we were off camera, but I always thought that I wanted to be a veterinarian. And I had we can go into the whole story, but I had some pretty major imposter syndrome, which not even imposter syndrome, because I hate that. Gosh, I'm going to start this right off on a strong note.
Do it.
Let's stop talking about imposter syndrome like it's something that we have to fix.
Right.
What garbage, right? Like imposter syndrome, first of all, it's like, I feel like the syndrome part is the new hysteria,
Yes.
When the system is broken. Yeah. When the system is broken, it's not on you to fix it. Anyway, that little rant aside, I never felt good enough to be a vet. I was like top of my class, 4.0 all the way through college and grad school, and still was like, oh, it's really competitive. I don't know if I can do it. My husband, on the other hand, for those of you that know him, Dermot Jevons, he had no doubts about it. He went straight through vet school, came to the States, and was just like having fun trying to figure out where he was going to do his follow-up work. And so
I can't relate to that.
He has given me, yeah, right. I know. I'm like, he's given me this totally new perspective of like, well, why wouldn't you? Like, why wouldn't you just show up and go on a tour across the U.S. and go to all of the top grad schools and figure out where? I'm like, because they might say no. Like, that's horrifying.
Yes.
That whole journey with him. So today, living with him, I've had this privilege of having, a lot of insight into the quite, if I may say it, quite painful world right now of consolidation and all of the major stressors that are happening in the industry without having to live it day to day. And so that's been, it's been a very interesting space to be an observer of that. And I'm grateful not to be in it. I have to say, like, I hate that because I love everything that, veterinary medicine is doing. I love that how you care for people. I love how you care for pets. And for one another. And I feel like the very best of the industry is getting squeezed out right now. So that's my outsider's perspective.
Well, I think it can be validating too for those of us who are in it and kind of feel that way a little bit, like vet med is having kind of an identity crisis right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are feeling that squeeze no matter what area we work in the profession. Yeah. And seeing, having somebody who's technically outside the profession in that you're not working directly in it is having somebody outside validate that and say, this is what I'm seeing, can actually be a little bit of a relief, I think, because it means we're not like, we don't need to sort of gaslight ourselves into thinking like, okay, these feelings aren't real and it's just us.
That's right. But there's no syndrome.
Right. There's no syndrome.
It's real. Yeah. I see it. Yeah.
Yes. And imposter syndrome, I hate the name, but I also don't. I feel like I've seen a lot of quotes, like I think Adam Grant had one recently that was like, imposter syndrome means that you're facing something that you don't necessarily feel like you have control over, that you are good, quote unquote, good enough to do yet. Right. But with that growth mindset, there's no reason that you can't feel comfortable in that space. And if you're not feeling that imposter syndrome, you might not be pushing yourself. And so it could be a really good sign.
That's it. I love that. I often talk about imposter syndrome as this, like when we're little kids, we're looking around and we're like, oh my gosh, there's Janie and she's falling off of her bike, and there's Joey and he's falling off his, and we're all falling off bikes and it's great. And then we hit a certain age, right? And we look around and we're like, oh my gosh, nobody's falling off of bikes.
Yeah.
Because
nobody can see me
about it, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not going to do it. So I'm just going to be the one, and everybody else knows the things and I don't know the things, but I'm not going to let them know that I don't know the things. And we end up just like not falling off bikes because we stopped trying to ride new bikes.
Yeah.
Which is a shame.
Yeah.
Right. It's an absolute shame. But we've got this kind of a shared sort of ignorance of the fact that everybody else is sitting in the same space of fear.
Yeah. This is very indicative of our first conversation where I felt like I'd met you before. But we got right into the meaty stuff, and people don't even necessarily know what we do actually do. No, it's my bad. But that all is really interesting, and it ties into what you actually do for a living. We know you're not a vet, but that is not a good introduction to what you actually do. So would you mind just letting people know what you do and what your areas of focus are?
Sure. Although I think it would be really fun to go through this entire podcast
and just not say it
the whole time.
Yeah.
So I'm a stress physiologist by trade. My PhD is in stress physiology, and I studied evolution in human behavior. Short version of a much longer story is that I am now a keynote speaker, and I get to travel the world and help people transform their fear into fuel that they can use. So help their brains kind of work for them rather than against them.
Love that.
That's what I do now.
Yeah, we could all use that. That was a very compact way to sum up what you do. You've had to do this before a few times,
but that one I've done.
Yeah. Well, before we get into the rest of our conversation, I like to learn a little bit more about our guests when we have them on. Like, so they're people and not just like voices spouting wisdom. Not that that's not important.
Love it.
But I was wondering, do you have, in a couple of the previous episodes of this podcast, we've talked about third spaces where like right now we're Dr. So-and-so, or we're so-and-so LVT, or we feel like we have to be expert in something all the time and we're on all the time. And then we go home and we're a mom or a wife or, a partner, and we feel like we are constantly playing that role. Is there a place, a third space where you can go where you're not Rebecca Heiss, PhD, or a wife, where you can just be you?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you asked that. I mean, this is the third time you've kind of asked me this. Once when we were talking initially, once in a nice prep email, thank you. And here, I thought I would be prepared to answer this, and here I am, like tearing up again at this question because I just think it's so incredibly powerful. It's so easy for us to wear the masks of mom, LVT, vet, tech, spouse, book club member, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I fell into that trap in a massive, massive way for most of my life, even up to just a couple years ago. And I was racing from city to city, being Dr. Heiss and here's my book and all the things. And I lost track of just being able to be. And I was very, very intentional in these last 2 years to create community here at home and fiercely protect it. So I have this incredible running group, my tribe, my intentional tribe of friends that, they're a group of mentors, they're a group of friends, they are old, young, wise humans that I get to just be with. And it's a gift that I would wish for everyone in this place to have an opportunity to share.
Love that. Yeah, running group has served that purpose for me too. Met a lot of really amazing people through running. And there's something about being on a run with someone too, where you just like, it's kind of like this for me. Like, well, I don't have a lot of boundaries anyway. Like I'm always too personal, but like there's I think the running really encourages that because you're not making eye contact. You're running next to someone. You're like going through something physically hard. And so there aren't a lot of like walls up, and runners just talk about everything. Like nothing's off limits.
It's so true. And I think part of it, I'm really gross. I am. I sweat profusely. I'm like snot rocketing. Sorry for your viewers that had to see that. But
the back sweat.
All of the bodily functions come out and you just become superhuman.
Yep.
You're just like, hey, here's all of me. I smell bad.
Yeah.
and it's, I don't know. It's lovely. It really does break down all of those barriers that hold people apart in a false way. So I love it.
Yeah. And the farther the run, the more that becomes true. Like ultra runners.
That could be 1 mile for me, by the way.
Yeah. I mean,
I can be 1 mile in some days.
Yes, for sure. Like you've been waiting all week to like dish to these people because it's a safe space. So that's really great. I'm glad you have that. And you're in Greenville, which is, it's a really great running city. So
I know it's lovely. We've got the Swamp Rabbit Trail. Any of y'all that are listening that are in Greenville, hit me up. We'll go for a run.
So let's get into it. Well, you're speaking at AAHA Con, which is in just a couple weeks now. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's 3 weeks.
I know.
And you're going to be giving the keynote, which is very exciting, something you're apparently very used to. So we're very lucky to have you. Can you give us like a kind of a high level view of what you're going to be talking about?
Yeah, sure. Although I have to say, I'm nervous for this one. I'm like really genuinely in my gut scared.
You are a professional keynote speaker. Nervous for this one.
Let's reiterate that. Well,
I love that.
I think so much of that. I'm trying a lot of new content with you all because I want this to feel. I mean, this is AAHA Con. You guys have completely reinvented yourself, and I want to reinvent myself as well to match that energy. And so I'm showing up with really fresh content, with a really fresh show. Honestly, I think this is going to be more of a show than a keynote. There is a lot of audience participation. And the high level overview of the content is just, it's simply that stress isn't going anywhere, right? It's not going anywhere. So how do we begin to work with it rather than fight it all the time? So we'll go through a series of stories from my life, from other people's lives, on how we can recalibrate our brains to respond differently to stress, how we can reframe those threats as challenges, and then ultimately how we can realign to allow stress to become our best friend and really work with it and have it help us in our performance rather than hinder us.
That sounds like a pipe dream, and I'm very excited to hear what you say, because I think the idea of stress being our best friend is something that it sounds great, and also like how. So I'm really excited.
I hear you, and I want to warn your viewers, like, and your listeners, like, it's not a magic pill. Right? Yeah. It's still work. It's still work. And listen, I like to get people excited about it because I'm so passionate about this, and I really do believe we have the opportunity to create that stress is the best friend kind of situation. But it doesn't mean I can give you this pill and like magically everything disappears.
Yeah.
Right? I still struggle with stress. We all struggle with stress. It's a reality of all of our lives. But there are definitely techniques that I think I can help with. So I'm excited for that too.
You know, I'm in hearing you say that you're a little nervous for it. Actually, like, one of the reasons I love that is because for anybody who has imposter syndrome about literally anything, you know, like, you do this all the time and you still get nervous about it. Like, you can spay 1 million dogs and still get a little nervous when you go in. I mean, I would honestly probably want my surgeon to be a little bit nervous. There's a lot resting on doing a good job, you know?
Exactly.
But also,
sorry.
Well, when you're a little nervous, I feel like that's sometimes where the best performances come out, right? Because that energy just fuels you, and that's good stress.
That's exactly it. I mean, we can talk about the whole U curve, or of stress and performance. And that if you have no stress, first of all, that's a dead person's goal. Nobody has no stress, but you don't want no stress, right? You want a little bit of stress to raise you to that highest level of performance. Yeah. And in fact, the people that stress is really, it's a barometer for how much you care sometimes. Yeah. You know, if you really, really care about something, you're going to be really stressed about it. Yeah, and that's a really interesting way to think about things, I think, because if you have zero stress, I'll tell a quick story. I used to climb trees, kind of professionally.
That can't be a quick story.
I'm trying in my head to make this a quick story, and I'm like, how far do I have to go into these details? So I studied crows, the American crows, for a decade. And we had a marked population, and in order to get to the nestlings, you have to climb these 100-foot tall trees. Which actually I was doing right around Cornell. So I know a lot of your listeners probably were at the vet school there, and they might have seen tagged birds. Those were my babies. Yeah. So I remember climbing one day, and I was up in 120 feet above a gorge, and the wind is blowing, and I'm right at the top of the tree, and I had zero adrenaline. I had zero stress response, and I stopped climbing that day. Because what I realized is, like, those are the moments, if you have trained yourself to be that comfortable in an actual life and death situation, it's a problem, right? That's when climbers die. Yeah. So I quit climbing for a bit, and had to return to it to get that adrenaline going again. I think stress is a really important thing for a lot of reasons.
I'm just anxious. I'm anxious thinking about you at the top of that tree. Like, just thinking about it is making my heart rate pick up a little bit. Like, I don't do well with heights. So,
well,
I'm not sure that would happen to me, but
Listen, give it some time. I promise you we can get you there. It's all about stress inoculation, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll stay scared. That's fine. So, so you said, you said you struggle with stress sometimes. And when we talked initially, when we met, you had said that people ask you, they just like assume that you don't get stressed out because you research stress and talk about it all the time. And you're like, oh no. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like how your relationship with stress has changed and what you tell people when they say things like that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing that I would tell people is like, yeah, no, that's just a complete illusion. Just because somebody is an expert in it doesn't mean that they've got it all figured out. You know, we're constantly, I think, evolving and growing ourselves. And my relationship with stress has gotten a lot better. I mean, when I first started studying it, I think we sometimes study the things that we need the most for ourselves. And so I specifically started studying imposter syndrome and like enoughness and worthiness and all of the, like I literally have people clap for me for a living. So that should tell you everything you need to know about.
Yeah. Well, talk to any dietitian, registered dietitian about their relationship with food, right? Most of it's coming out of a place of need, personal need.
Yeah. So I started studying stress because I found myself stressed out all the time and I needed some management techniques. And what I'll say is, you know, the techniques work. You know, I'm a strong believer in science. I use science to my advantage and I still lose it at times. And I think it's so important that people see that and recognize that. One of the best techniques I have for managing my own stress is granting myself quick forgiveness. Just like I call it fast forgiveness, right? Okay, that happened. You're really over the top, Beck. Pull it back. How would you react if this was a friend? And really, you know, giving myself the sort of emotional distance to look at the situation through the lens of my best friend and saying, all right, what advice would you give to her? How would you treat this person who just lost their mind and like needs a little coaching? And that's been a really helpful technique for me. But yeah, I'm certainly not perfect and I haven't achieved the like Zen state. And I would warn you if anybody ever tells you that they're like in this perfect peaceful place of stress, I'm like, maybe run away. Yeah.
Like I believe in better living through chemistry, but that might be taking it a little too far.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm with you on that. Fully. Right.
You know, we had a guest on the podcast last year, Steve Magnus, who's an author and performance coach and athlete. And he had said something about like a technique that he talks about where you kind of talk to yourself in the third person. So you're like, you know, Katie is feeling like she has too much on her plate and she's really regretting having overcommitted. And it's like that one switch helps make you think about it as like, if this were another person, you would give them so much more grace. Like, especially in the veterinary profession, we're such an empathic group.
Yeah.
And yet we really struggle to turn that eye on ourselves.
And yet we are the hardest on ourselves. Yeah, that's a big part of my keynote actually is being able to create that space. Yeah.
Preview,
so I don't want to give it all away, but
okay. We'll switch the subject really quick.
There.
But it takes, you know, it's one of those things where I think, you know, like when we talked before, I had mentioned Addison's disease, because to me, like the first thing I think of when you say like absence of stress is I think of the Addisonian dog that comes in with no stress hormone at all. And like dogs do not typically, like the dogs that we see in our like especially higher end practices, like don't have a particularly stressful life. Like they sit on the couch and they go for a walk and they get in the car. Yes. Yeah. My dog isn't even in here today because he couldn't be bothered to come out from under his blanket that he's under downstairs while he's snoring softly in the middle of the day. Like they don't have a stressful life. But when we say stress, when we're talking about them, we're talking about like somebody comes over or like they're hungry, you know, and they don't have any cortisol to help them deal with that physiologic, you know, help them go through the physiologic changes they need. And they need that. And stress is not only a part of life, it's essential for life. But it's really hard to think about that when it comes to myself.
I mean, this is the interesting thing, right? I feel like humans are I won't say the only, but certainly probably the most advanced in harming ourselves because we have such an enlarged frontal lobe, right? We are the only species that I know of that really tells so many stories about what the stress means that we end up hurting ourselves. So, I'll quote Robert Sapolsky, I call him the father of stress. I mean, he is an incredible stress researcher, and he talks about stress as meant for 3 minutes of screaming terror across the savannah. Yeah. After which, either you're dead, right, or the stressful event is over.
Yeah.
And so, like lions, for example, lions have an 84%, 83, 84, somewhere in that chance of failing when they hunt. That's a massive failure rate.
Yes.
And so they have this massive stress response of like, I'm hungry, I got to go hunt. And then they hunt and they fail.
And it's like,
immediately what they do is they go to sleep. Right? They take a nap. Like humans are like, oh my God, I failed. What does this mean? How will this affect my family? Will I be able to look? I'm just like the worst person in the world. And it's the most bizarre thing. We've used this like classical conditioning response to shock ourselves, literally, after we're experiencing stress. And it's such a bizarre relationship, but it's one that I'm working to try and untangle in myself and hopefully for others as well.
So I want to ask you a follow-up question on that I didn't prepare you for.
Oh, good. I like it.
But I'm thinking about so the lion, is like, okay, everything's into this hunt. Like I'm all in, and I'm like,
that's it.
Running across the savannah trying to catch this, whatever, the hoofed mammal. And I don't want to get my geography and yes. And then it fails and they're like, oh, never mind, we'll try again tomorrow. Like we could be hungry. Whatever. And they go to sleep. Yeah. But and that, hoofed mammal is also like, oh my God, what just happened? And then they got to rest, right? They're not prepared for another
chewing on something.
Chase at that moment. They need to chill out. And probably if somebody else were to chase them right then, they would probably be dead because they're tired. And for us, we know enough, we're logical enough to say, okay, I'm actually stressed out because I forgot to send an email. And it's not an email saying, please don't come to my house and kill me. It's an email being like, I will get back to you about this next week.
Right.
And so logically, we know that this is not a life or death situation. But is our stress response the same? Or have we learned as a species to modulate that?
No, that is when I talked about recalibrating the stress response, that whole first half of my talk is dedicated to exactly what you just hit on. Every single stress response we have is built for life and death. It's putting us into that. It's like, it's a tiger, that email, that ping, that thing, that thing. Oh,
that makes me want to burn my email inbox.
Right. Yes. Right. That's because our stress response, I mean, you all know this, stress is a highly conserved hormone. Cortisol, you see cortisol in fish. You're looking at this really ancient response to predation, essentially, and major stressful events. So one of the reframes that I tell people is when that email comes in to go, it's not a tiger, right? This is not actually going to kill and eat me. But it's, the logic part shuts down under stress, which is, not super helpful to us. We're having that fight, flight response, fight, flight, freeze response. And we're going, I got to email, the hit, the reply, all to everybody. And oh my God, I just sent that. Oh, what I do, it facilitates further stress. And we end up in these, very higher baseline levels of cortisol with less acute responses to it, because we're already operating at such a high level throughout the day that any little thing will trigger us and send us over the edge.
That makes so much sense. And it also and it also makes me feel a little anxious about going back to my email after this.
I'm sorry.
But that also explains why, if you're tired or you've just had a fight with someone or whatever, you're less able to modulate that response before you go into that email inbox because your cortisol's already and your resources are depleted.
That's exactly it. You've nailed it. Nailed it. Yeah. So do like lions do. Go take a nap.
Yes. That sounds great. I'm going to try to explain that.
I'm so sorry because I do tend to do this before I give solutions. I stress people out about their own stress. I'm like, wait, I'm doing the opposite thing that I'm supposed to be doing. It's okay.
Stress can be good.
Yeah, exactly.
It can help us find solutions. Yeah.
That's right. And it can. Yeah.
This AAHA podcast is brought to you by CareCredit. CareCredit understands that all veterinary teams are busier than ever. To help patients get the care they need, the CareCredit Health and Pet Care Credit Card allows clients to access a budget-friendly financing experience anytime, from anywhere on their own smart device. They can learn, see if they pre-qualify, apply, and even pay if approved, all on that smart device. With just a tap, they have a friendly, contactless way to pay over time for the services and treatments their pet needs, whether it be a general, referring, or specialty hospital, as long as they accept the CareCredit credit card. Well, and I don't know if you're familiar with the FearFree, certification and FearFree, like teaching. FearFree is a program, that helps veterinary professionals learn how to create less stress and provide a more calm experience for animals and their owners at the vet. And there are other programs too that are wonderful. And I just love the whole theory behind that. I don't think I could work at a hospital where that wasn't the culture anymore, because it's so much easier on us not to see our patients freaking out.
No kidding.
But one of the things that we talk about when we're talking to clients, like not every client understands why it's important to give, say, your gabapentin to your cat before the visit, because they're like, why can't you just get it done? Like, I can't pill him. I don't know how to do this. Like, I forgot to give it to him. And we always tell them it's because the cat doesn't know that we're not about to kill it. The cat thinks every time it goes in that carrier, like there's a good chance that this could be like the last thing it ever sees.
Yeah.
And we can't explain to them that all we're going to do is like trim their nails,
Right.
But you're basically saying that we're the same.
That's
even though
exactly
we know we're the same.
Well, and here's why, right? You have 400 billion bits of information coming at you every single second. That's like, think about it, 400 billion bits of information every single second. And the brain can't process all of it. So what does it do? It just passes most of it along to our subconscious to process. So all of those ancient, instinct stories, shortcuts that helped us to survive for all those years, they're like, oh, here's how you handle it. Enormous stress response. Yeah, exactly. So really it's about rewiring that ancient portion of our brain, because we know cognitively, but we don't have the time in the day to go, wait a second, this isn't a tiger. It's just a ping. It's just a ding. How do I process that information when, 399 billion other things are coming at me?
Yeah. That makes sense. Our forebrain is more of a slow twitch muscle there.
Very slow. Slow for all the good that it does us. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so then we're trying to overcome thousands of years of biology in order to not freak out when we get an unexpected email from our boss. And
exactly.
cool. That's no big deal. So So we hear a lot about self-care, like yoga, meditation, things, eating right and getting out for a walk in the morning, things that can sort of help to like make you a little bit more zen. Is any of that going to help with the rewiring, or do we need other methods to do that?
Everything will help. Yes. And I think, yes, all of those things are super important, right? And meditation in particular, I was definitely one of those people who was like, meditation, that's woo woo. That's like, And then of course I read the research and I was like, oh my gosh, I need this in my life. It's crazy powerful, people, like just giving you that space to respond, and the rewiring that happens, like literally you shrink your amygdala when you meditate for 20 minutes a day for 8 weeks. It's insane. And you grow your frontal lobe. So, I mean, that's from a Harvard study. I want to say it's 2003. I can find it for you for show notes. But like really, really powerful. So, I mean, that can work. And I think that in combination with some of the other more active rewiring is probably the most powerful. So I talk a lot about stress inoculation. Which you all are familiar. It's give yourself the vaccine for stress, which means just like, oh gosh, right? Well, there kind of is though. That's the fun thing. The the bad thing about the stress response is that it's so generalized, right? We get it for the emails and the tigers. The good thing about the stress response is that it's so generalized. So actually training yourself to respond a little bit less under certain stressors is really good at tamping down the entire stress response. So I will often challenge people to do what I call fearless challenges. And it can be as simple as, walking down the street and giving a stranger a compliment. I'm like, that sounds a little bit like, I think that would be easy. But if you put yourself in the situation and then you go try it, and you might have this little flutter of your heart, like, what will they do? What will they say? That's stress. That is literally your stress response going, they might reject me. Oh my gosh, if they reject me, if I get kicked out of this tribe, I'm going to die because I live with 20 other people. No, that's not the environment I live in. I'm totally safe. Even if they reject me, like, I'm cool. Everything is safe. And so it's kind of this catching up of our ancient brain to the modern world. So, I've got probably 300 discomfort challenges that are safe forms of discomfort to elicit a stress response in a way that we know isn't going to kill us, isn't going to harm us, isn't going to bring anything but probably smiles to people's faces, but still gets us kind of into that space where we can retrain our brain and layer down some things that our brain says, oh, interesting, I had a stress response and I didn't die today, right? So that when discomfort begins to find us and we're not seeking it, we've got new patterns, new neural pathways for that to go, instead of going immediately to, this is the worst thing ever and I'm going to die. It's like, oh, I know what this means and it's okay. I'm still safe. That ping of that email isn't going to kill me this time.
So you're kind of training your brain to tell itself a different story.
Exactly. I mean, it's just classical conditioning, right? One of my, I'll tell this, it's kind of a sad story, but one of my favorite experiments of all time, and I won't get into the epigenetic part of it, but they took male rats and classically conditioned them with cherry blossom scent. So they'd spray cherry blossoms and they'd shock the rats. And unsurprisingly, very quickly, they developed a conditioning experience with the cherry blossom smell. So they could spray cherry blossom and these rats would display fear behavior. Their cortisol would go through the roof and they'd shake. And one of the things that struck me about this experiment is that we are both the rats in this case and the people administrating the shock. We're smelling cherry blossoms everywhere in our emails, in our day-to-day interactions with strangers, in that angry client. We're smelling this thing that isn't going to kill us, is not going to hurt. Like being rejected, failing, all of those things aren't actually going to give us shocks unless we do it to ourselves. So yeah, that rewiring is pretty important.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy that like the rats didn't even need to be shocked after a certain point because their bodies just responded exactly the same. And
no, here's the craziest bit of this. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to tell the end of the story. The end of the story is that these male mice were then mated to female mice who had never smelled cherry blossoms, never been exposed to the shock. And the pups of those mice, when they smelled cherry blossoms, would shake and shiver.
What?
Oh! So this is literally like epigenetic transference of fear.
Oh my God.
Isn't that crazy? So you think about trauma getting passed along from generation to generation. We've had immense traumas passed along from our ancestors that we're still shaking over today for no good reason.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? I love that study so much.
Yeah, my head just exploded. Like I can't even process how that works, or like the magnitude of what that means.
The implications on that,
Yes. Yeah. I mean, especially when you think about like all, our work in DEIB and groups that have historically accumulated a lot of trauma that's been passed down. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, that is a really interesting study. And also, I'm assuming that what you're saying is it works the other way, that we can train ourselves not to administer the shock when we smell cherry blossoms and teach us to develop a different reaction.
The very important follow-up study, is that those pups were able to be uninduced. That's not the right word, but retrained, reconditioned. Some cognitive behavioral science out there is going to be like, that is not the correct term, but I think you guys know what I'm saying.
Yeah, we do.
To allow them to escape that behavior. So yeah,
really cool.
and not pass that trauma on to the next generation, which is wild. Yeah.
I think we're hearing a lot right now in veterinary medicine about the power of the story. I mean, it seems like it's this like storytelling and the power of stories is really becoming something that people are getting more used to talking about. And I know I'm sort of I'm a liberal arts kid, so I love storytelling. I love fiction, and I love, you know, speaking and oral storytelling. And I work for somebody, Jessica Vogelsang is also a big fan of the story. So there's a lot of storytelling at AAHA right now. But so my perception might be a little bit skewed. But do you feel like the idea of storytelling and the power that it carries, do you feel like that's becoming a little bit more something we're comfortable with thinking about?
Yes. And I'm so grateful for it, because I think so often, science and storytelling have always been compatible, but I don't think we've always seen them that way. So I mean, we're talking about liberal arts and science and when we look at, like, I'll give a study that I won't give the one that I'll use in my keynote. I'll give a different one. There's a study on stress and health from 2012, and it looked at 20,000 people and their mortality rates based on stress and the perception that their stress impacts their health. So did they tell the story that their high levels of stress impacted their health? And the results were absolutely shocking. So individuals that perceived that their stress affected their health and had high stress died at a significantly higher rate, had higher mortality. Wow. However, those that had the highest level of stress but didn't tell the story that stress was bad for their health actually had higher survivability than those people that had very low stress, which it hurts my head a little bit. So people aren't dying of stress. They're dying of the story that stress is bad for them.
That's crazy.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Yeah. Story is incredibly powerful. And so the stories that we tell, am I good? Am I bad? Am I worthy? Am I enough? Am I this? Am I that? Do I have enough time? I mean, that's a big one, time scarcity, right? Another study, and again, I'll pull all these references for people that want them, but another study looked at people trying to solve puzzles. And they told one group, you have plenty of time to solve this puzzle. Not an issue. Okay, take your time. You got this. And they told the other group, you will not be able to solve this puzzle in the amount of time that we're giving you. And so they created some time scarcity. And of course, the two groups were given the exact same amount of time, but the ones who were told the story that they'd have plenty of time finished it. And those that didn't. I mean, at a significant level of difference. So, be really aware of the stories that you tell, because those stories so often become your reality.
That makes me look differently at things like affirmations, which I like you, was a big meditation skeptic.
I know, oh my gosh.
We've had a couple of people on the podcast, like Patty Casebolt last year, and a couple of other people who really have talked about meditation. Patty talked about the same study you did, where your brain can transform after 8 weeks of meditating regularly, and all of that kind of eventually added up, and so I'm on day 150 of my Insight Timer streak.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Very excited about that. Insight Timer has a free version, so anybody listening who's like, I don't want to pay for Headspace, I love Headspace, but it does cost money. Insight Timer has a free version, so... And we even have there are some veterinary-specific meditations on there.
Nice.
Yeah, shout out to Melissa Allen for that.
That's so cool.
But the idea of, looking in the mirror, for instance, or having a Post-it on the mirror that you have to repeat to yourself, or the meditations on Insight Timer that have affirmations where you're supposed to repeat things like, I am supported, I trust my intuition, that kind of thing. It feels so odd to me. And
I know.
And yet you're saying that if we do that over and over, and we might actually really start to believe that, and that could have an actual physiologic effect on our health.
It's yes. Yeah. The short answer is yes. And I know because I am the exact same skeptic. I actually have a course. I created a course called Manifesting for Skeptics and Scientists, right? Because I'm like,
I love that. I'm in.
I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Like, that is garbage. And then I was like, oh gosh, there's actual science here. Holy smokes. And so much of that is like you said, the story you tell. Here's a good one that relates directly to physiology for you physio nerds out there. So identical milkshakes. This is the milkshake study. It's one of my favorites. Identical milkshakes. We tell one group of people, you're going to drink the indulgent shake, right? 520 calories. It's rich. It's going to be delicious. You tell the other group, this is the diet shake. It's the sensible shake. No problems. And of course, they're identical in calories and on all the things. And you have the same people sample them about a week apart. And unsurprisingly, the indulgent shake is rated as tasting better and all of this. But here's the crazy thing. When people drink the indulgent shake, their ghrelin levels, so that hormone level, that hunger hormone level, plummeted and stayed low. Whereas those that drank the sensible shake, their ghrelin levels didn't significantly change. So the story they told about whether, oh gosh, this is going to be I'm going to be so full. I talk about sparring with yourself, right? The stories change your physiology, which changes your actions, which changes your results. And that's the secret. You want to talk about manifesting, like that's the secret. It's the story that you tell is changing your physiology, which changes how you react to the world or show up in the world. And that changes your results. So, I think there's a lot to that. Manifesting stuff. Okay, wait, one more quick story. So
okay.
Katie, I'll turn the question on you.
Okay.
Have you ever been in love?
Yes.
Okay. So for the first week that you fell in love, or you met this great person, it doesn't have to be when you initially fell in love, but when you met that person that kind of like, whew, you could have had the worst week at work. It could have been pouring on you, and you're just kind of like,
oh,
life
yeah.
is amazing. Everything is good. You're like checking your text. You get that dopamine hit all day.
Totally.
Why? Like nothing changed. It's just the story that we're telling. Like we can create this honeymoon effect, right, for our lives anytime we want. But sometimes it takes a trigger like, oh gosh, I just fell in love. And I'm just like thinking about love and I'm thinking about the positive things in life. And so you see all of the positive things in life rather than constantly being drawn to the snakes, tigers, lions, and bears, oh my, that our brain naturally gets drawn towards. So, sex and survival, that's what our brain is all about.
Right. Yeah.
And so like, I hate to break it down to those like very simple terms, but if you can focus a little bit more on the sex / happiness / like,
right.
the like, good things in life.
In the end, we're all rats, right?
In the end, we're all rats. I mean, isn't that the great take-home message today? Right? But yeah, being able to focus on some of the more positive things. I am enough. You are enough. Like, I feel good. Rebecca, you're amazing. You got this. Those create that kind of honeymoon effect that change our physiology and change our results.
Wow. So it's so powerful. Yeah. And feels like maybe magic is real just a little bit, because it feels like,
I love it.
Yeah. Just because there's an explanation for it physiologically doesn't make it feel any less like magic.
I know. I'll tell you, I realized this studying birds. This was a major realization for me because I have always been kind of a very logic driven, very science. If science can't explain it, then it's not real, right?
Yeah.
The magic, it's garbage.
Yeah.
And I remember for the first time seeing a little budgie under UV light. And I was like, oh my goodness, there's all these spots and the magnificent colors and they're a very drab looking bird from the outside, but you put them under UV. And I was like, birds see that? What else am I missing? What tools? Just because I can't see it or taste it or touch it or experience it doesn't mean that it's not real. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means I don't have the tool to quite see it as such. Yes. And so that's kind of created the magic for me that allows me to hold that space to say, oh, just because I don't understand how it happens or why it happens doesn't mean it's not happening. Yeah.
Well, I love that. And I got this button for myself when I was taking my acupuncture certification, because that's how I feel about acupuncture. Is like,
Oh,
it
cool.
feels like magic, and there are physiologic effects happening and physiologic explanations for why it works, but you don't necessarily have to understand them to see the benefits. And so I got this little button. It says, "There's a bit of magic in everything," because to me, it felt like it was a reconciliation between the part of my brain that wants evidence for everything and the part of my brain that fully believes that we cannot ever completely understand everything. And that, what fun would that be, right? So
yeah, absolutely. I love it. I love it. Getting comfortable in that ambiguity, I think, is a really tough thing to do. But
yeah, but it's a happy place once you're there, I think. So it's like it makes you feel like the world has like limitless potential, which it does.
And so do you.
Yeah. So, but that's, so I have one more question before we wrap up, because I know that there are a lot of people in the profession right now, as you say, who are feeling like they're a little bit broken, or their environment is a little bit broken or very broken, and they feel stuck and trapped. And simply telling them to tell themselves a different story is probably, even if that would eventually work, it's going to be difficult to want to adopt when you feel like there's so many circumstances out of your control that are not changing. And so I'm wondering, like, in a situation like that, are there daily or regular exercises that you can do, or habits that you can adopt that will kind of help you work through those tough situations that you can't always just leave?
Yeah, I'll give you my 3-2-1 liftoff. This is the technique that I used when I was probably in my darkest space. 3-2-1. So 3 minutes is to acknowledge the stressor. I think so often we try and push it aside. We try and ignore it. We're like, oh, it's just, if I just ignore it enough, or if I drown myself in alcohol or work or sex or the next person or the next job, whatever that thing is that you just are using to escape. Or yoga. I mean, listen, it can be healthy things too, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to yoga this. I'm going to yoga this. I'm running. Yeah. Yoga this away. Take 3 minutes and stress the heck out of it. Like, think about it. Just allow yourself to feel all those feelings. I often tell people, like, it's like trying to say, don't think about pink elephants right now.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Stop it. Don't stop it. Why are you doing that? And we're doing the exact same thing. So name it, name it to tame it. Name it, understand it, worry the heck out of it for 3 minutes. What that's going to do is that's going to get you past that initial surge of cortisol, right? Now we've survived the 3 minutes of screaming terror across the savannah. Our next step is to give our power back to our parasympathetic nervous system, back to our conscious brain. So we're going to take 2 deep breaths. And I teach a physiological sigh, which is simply breathing deeply through our nose, sipping in that last little bit of oxygen when you don't think you can take any more in, go, right, really good, holding it for 2 counts, and then releasing through your mouth. So 2 breaths. So we've got 3 minutes of worrying, 2 breaths to bring yourself back into that parasympathetic space. And then 1 question. Start getting curious. Ask any question. It can be about yourself. It can be about a reflective piece. It can be about the situation. It can be literally any question, because what you're doing is you're kicking yourself out of fear and into curiosity. Curiosity and fear cannot coexist in the brain. It's this incredible there's no mechanism for it, because for 200,000 plus years, nobody ever looked at a charging tiger and went, I wonder how fast it's coming, right? Like you don't get curious. You don't get curious when you're under a lot of stress, which is, problematic. But we can use that to our advantage if we know about that, to go, oh, if I can just be curious in this moment, it'll force my brain to get back online. So start asking questions in those moments, and that might take you down a path. And again, take action on those curiosities. I think often we get paralyzed in fear, which is just a freeze response, right? We talk about fight and flight. We often don't talk about freeze. Same reaction. You're frozen. You don't want to take an action. It could be wrong. What if it's wrong? And then we have a whole nother stress response over that. Then you'll know. Good. Then you're no worse off. You're just back where you started. Take another path until it feels wrong. So curiosity really allows us to move within stress and not get stuck into that space where we do feel like we can't budge.
That's really interesting. I've never heard anybody talk about that technique before, and I really love that. And we are,
Thanks.
as a group, veterinary professionals are very curious typically. And so,
There it is.
but I'm sure, it's very difficult for that curiosity to coexist when you feel like you're just in survival mode, like get through each day. So I really love that. Be curious.
Yeah. Be curious.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Rebecca Heiss, thank you so much for spending this time. And even if you had said your whole keynote this time, it's going to be a completely different experience on the stage at AAHA Con. So I know we touched on some elements of it, but I have absolutely no doubt that it's going to be magical and wonderful and really a fantastic experience. So I'm really excited for that.
Well, plenty more stories to come.
Excellent.
And if I can get my own stress under control about this, it's going to be great.
Well, your passion for this material and for helping people understand this better, it really comes through. Comes through the screen. So in person is going to be terrific. Where can people find out more about you, more about your work? I know you have a book. So
I do. I have a book. Sitting behind me called Instinct. You can certainly read that if you want. You can find it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and your local bookshop, hopefully. My website is RebeccaHeiss.com. My Instagram, which is probably the most active, is Dr. Rebecca Heiss, just Dr. Rebecca Heiss, I was going to say .com. And all of my courses can be found on Dr. Rebecca Heiss. So yeah, I'm very reachable. Please don't hesitate to reach out, ask me questions, find me. I'm here to help, truly. So don't be shy.
You can't get away from us now.
That's great. I look forward to it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we'll put links in the show notes. If I miss any, and there's something that Rebecca talked about that she'd like to know more about, just hit me up. My email is podcast@aha.org. You can always ask me any questions that you want me to pass on to any of our guests. And I know Rebecca is one of the most responsive and excited and enthusiastic guests that we've ever had. And I love it. So I will be happy to relay messages if you have any. And for those of you who will get to see her again, we'll see you in San Diego in September. Thanks so much for listening. Rebecca, thank you. And we will catch you next time on Central Line.